Okay, the talk is, was Einstein a Pinko communist spy? Einstein got involved in a lot of politics. Those who are his fans are not necessarily aware of all the things that Einstein got involved in. Taking into account all the political issues he got involved in, that does not leave much time for physics, hence why he might have left his theorising messed up, i.e. he wasn't devoting much of his time to physics. So if we go to my videos, go through so many of them. Video manager. There. So got my videos. Let me go through here. Next to I've only got things like Einstein here, cuckoo process. You go through his physics, it doesn't make any sense, it's sort of a cuckoo process, as pointed out by this one. And you try to go through his maths, Einstein's maths, and it's just nonsense. So it would make sense that he's not, if he's always really interested in his politics, and he's not that much interested in physics, then no wonder he's left it in a mess. Trouble is, he's got such a big fan club, and his fan club don't want the physics sorted out. They just want it to carry on in a mess as the way it is. So the links I'm going to be referring to is this one, the FBI and Einstein there, and I'll be doing the book discussion on the Einstein file. It's where Fred Jerome talks about his book, and I'll refer to a link here called Pinko, explain what the term means. So the issue is, was Einstein a Pinko communist spy? Question mark. Let's go to the first one. Pinko. So that one. Right. This is the book discussion. Book discussion on the Einstein file. It's Fred Jerome talked about his book, the Einstein file. J. Edgar Hoover's Secret War Against the World's Most Famous Scientist, published by Martin's Press. In this book he details the activities of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, FBI, in spying on Albert Einstein and his associates. He also details the pacifist and socialist politics of Albert Einstein and his involvement in the civil rights movement, which provoked J. Edgar Hoover into leading an FBI campaign to link the Nobel Prize winning physicist to Soviet espionage activities and discredit his activity. So, making out that Einstein was a Soviet spy. Mr. Jerome and Miss Simmons read passages from the book focusing on racial conflict, and then some questions from the members of the audience. I'm not going to show all of it, you can actually go there and see it yourself. It's just highlighting some of the things in it. Here we go.
'55, the FBI compiled a 2,000-page file on Albert Einstein, acting on suspicions linking him to Soviet espionage activities. Next, author Fred Jerome details the Bureau's activities. His new book, The Einstein File, spells out how the Bureau spied on Einstein and his associates and identifies some of the informants who said he was a spy. He also explains the pacifist and socialist politics of the author of the Theory of Relativity, which Mr. Jerome concludes was the driving force behind J. Edgar Hoover's efforts to discredit Einstein. This History on Book TV discussion is 35 minutes.
Thank you. There are, besides Frances Golden, my agent, and her associate, Sidel Kramer, who couldn't be here tonight, and Michael Denany, my editor extraordinaire, there are many people here tonight whom I'd like to introduce, but not now. I hope to do so later, because I think we should get on with the reading and discussion. I'm honored, and you're all fortunate tonight that help me with the brief reading that we're going to do. My dear friend Gwen Simmons has agreed to take part. So if you'll welcome her, I won't give you all the wonderful skills that she has. This reading focuses on just one of many possible aspects of the book. Afterwards, the floor will be open for questions, with more questions and comments welcome later, and on the website www.theeinsteinfile.com. Of all the little-known aspects of Einstein's political dimension, the least known is his anti-racism. Einstein is quoted on T-shirts, coffee mugs, posters, and calendars, yet nowhere in all this Einsteinia will you find his comment to the Cheney Records student newspaper of a small black college in Pennsylvania, quote, "Race prejudice has unfortunately become an American tradition which is uncritically handed down from one generation to the next," unquote. Also missing are remarks Einstein made to the Atlanta Conference on anti-racist educators 10 years before the Civil Rights Movement. Quote, "Every right-minded person will be grateful to you for having united to fight this evil that so grievously injures the dignity and repute of our country." Also missing from the T-shirt scene, Einstein's statement that, quote, "Racism is America's worst evil." During the last 20 years of his life, Einstein almost never spoke at universities. He considered the honorary degree programs to which he was frequently invited to be ostentatious. Moreover, his declining health made it difficult to travel, so he simply adopted a just say no rule. But in May 1946, he broke that rule to speak at Lincoln University in Pennsylvania, the oldest black university in the world. Both the year and the school are significant. Here's how one of Lincoln's students described Einstein's presentation, writing in the student newspaper, the Lincolnian.
And I'd just like to say that I am very honored to be sharing these moments with my dear friends Fred and Jocelyn. Here's how one of the Lincoln students described Einstein's presentation in the Lincolnian. On Friday, May 3rd, a very simple man came to Lincoln University. His emaciated face and simplicity made him appear as a biblical character. Quietly, he stood with an expression of questioning wonder upon his face as President Horace Mann Bond conferred a degree. Then this man with the long hair and deep eyes spoke into a microphone of the disease, racism, that humanity had. In the deep accents of his native Germany, he said he could not be silent. And then he finished, and the room was still. Later, he lectured on the theory of relativity to the Lincoln students. And later that night, Albert Einstein went back to Princeton.
To understand the full significance of Einstein's presentation at Lincoln and its minuscule coverage by the mainstream media, we need to recall the racial situation in America in what might be called the bloody spring of 1946. In the wake of World War II, a wave of lynchings had swept across America, and within 1 year after Hitler, Mussolini, and the fascists had been defeated, 56 black Americans had been lynched in this country. Most of them GIs who had returned from fighting for democracy in Europe. The mainstream media missed or ignored many of these murders. But on July 27th, 1946, a front-page story in the New York Times, which Einstein read every day, reported one of the more gruesome cases, and lynching in America suddenly became national and international and unavoidable news.
From the New York Times.
Well, you get the general idea. Einstein was opposed to these sort of atrocities that were happening, and although Einstein normally gets a lot of publicity in newspapers, he's pointing out that Einstein's getting minuscule reporting, so some of the things Einstein says are sort of like, not getting the big advertising in the newspapers. But I want to clip on to a bit further on. So I think you just really get the general idea of what's going on. Let's see what the ending is like. Okay.
People haven't read the book, which means we should have another party after you all read the book and come back. But there's one person here who has read the book more than once, and I at least one. Well, no, one person here who has read the book more than once, and not only read it but contributed to it, edited it, and is in many ways the godmother of the book. And I would like to end by introducing her, and although she said she didn't want to say anything, ask her to say a couple of words, and that's Dorothy Zellner, my friend for longer than I like to remember.
I have to tell everybody, this is my oldest friend. I was 7 when I met him. He is 6. And and he's learned something in between since then. This is the person who was my teacher, who I owe a tremendous amount to. And I always told him the book has to be written. This is an important book. So I'm very happy to see all of you. And I hope we share that it is an important book.
Let's go and enjoy the food, and even though they say that book parties don't sell books here.
I wake up in the morning with a summer feeling, smiling in the shiny sun, just to let go.
Okay, the advert's finished, so coming back to it again. Got too many things open.
There's some out there. You have one more question? One more question.
Hi, Fred. I mean, we all know some very popular things about Einstein, that he wrote the famous letter to Roosevelt advising the building of the atomic bomb, and he was against the use of atomic energy after the war, and his offer of becoming president of Israel. But why is so absent this attention to his civil rights, almost unknown until this book?
Why have Einstein's politics been kept so little known? A short question, a little longer answer, but I would just tell you the story. I was at meeting with some top scientists recently, and a leading Nobel Prize-winning physicist leaned over to me, and he knew about the book, and he says, Einstein was a Pinko. And I said, why are we whispering? I'll give you that. That's the answer.
So, there you go. Einstein's politics, all his political actions, are not widely known, and the reason probably is because Einstein was a Pinko. We look at what the word Pinko means here at Wikipedia. Pinko is a slang term coined in 1925 in the United States to describe a person regarded as being sympathetic to communism, though not necessarily a Communist Party member, and it's since come on to mean other things. So basically, Pinko is you've got leanings towards communism. I suppose if you were a communist you'd be red. Pinko is you are going a bit red. The term has its origins in the notion that pink is a lighter shade of red, a colour associated with communism, red associated with communism. So Einstein was probably a Pinko. Einstein was getting involved in politics. He was civil rights, human rights and so forth, and being in America, he's not looked favourably on by people like J. Edgar Hoover for getting involved in things like that, and he gets suspected of being a Pinko and probably a communist spy and so forth. And here's the main article on things from the World Socialist website, and it's talking about the book which we just had a little talk on, the FBI and Albert Einstein. The Einstein file, J. Edgar Hoover's secret war against the world's most famous scientist. Right, read you some of it. A 22-year campaign of spying and slander by the FBI against Albert Einstein is traced in this recently published book. That the FBI spied on prominent personalities, including artists, musicians, scientists and scholars, has been well known for decades. The FBI file on Einstein, perhaps the greatest scientist of the 20th century, first came to light in 1983 when Robert Allen Schwartz, a professor at Florida International University, wrote an article on the subject for the Nation magazine. Up to 25% of the Einstein file was originally blacked out or withheld by the authorities. Author Fred Jerome sued under the Freedom of Information Act and successfully attained most of the remaining material. The result is a much more detailed examination of the 1,800-page dossier compiled in the decades-long campaign against Einstein. So this is where this book is coming from, the Einstein file. It's coming from recent information held about Einstein. Right, and it carries on. This book is well worth a full reading. In its own examination of Einstein's activities, the Einstein file reveals to a wider audience what has remained little known in the decades since Einstein's death. The Nobel Prize-winning physicist whose theories of special relativity changed the world and whose name became synonymous with scientific genius was deeply committed to the fight against war and for democratic rights and civil liberties. He was also an outspoken opponent of social inequality and an advocate of a socialist planned economy. Socialist, that's almost communist, I think. The Einstein dossier serves as a useful reminder of the scope of FBI spying. Pious and complacent liberals often remark on the excesses of the McCarthy era. As the campaign against Einstein shows, these methods long predated the Cold War and McCarthy, although they reached a friendship pitch in the early 1950s. Long before the Cold War and the Smith Act prosecutions of the leaders of the Communist Party, the mere expression of socialist or radical views by a prominent figure was considered sufficient basis for an FBI investigation. The the techniques employed against Einstein, illegally opening his mail, monitoring his phone calls, and compiling a detailed record of his political views and activities for the purpose of criminalising them, were a standard operating procedure. So, subsequent history has also shown the FBI's attack on democratic rights didn't stop with McCarthy's downfall, nor with the demise of the notorious J. Edgar Hoover, who ruled over the agency for nearly 50 years until his death in 1972. Right, getting on to the Einstein bit, the official campaign against Einstein began even before he settled in the US as a refugee from Hitler in 1933. When he applied for a visa in 1932 to teach at the University of California, as he had done on several previous occasions, an extreme right-wing outfit called the Woman Patriot Corporation sent a 16-page letter to the State Department arguing that he should not be allowed into the country. According to this group, Einstein's well-known anti-war and international views amounted to direct affiliation with communist and anarchic communistic organisations and groups. So because of Einstein's political beliefs and his political actions, he's getting associated as being a communist. The State Department, having received this missive, proceeded to interrogate Einstein at the US consulate in Berlin about his political views. According to an Associated Press report at the time, Professor Einstein's patience broke. His usual genial face stern and his normally melodious voice strident, he cried, "What's this, an inquisition? Is this an attempt at tyranny? I don't propose to answer such silly questions. I didn't ask to go to America. Your countrymen invited me, yes, begged me. If I am to enter your country as a suspect, I don't want to go at all. If you don't want to give me a visa, please say so, then I know where I stand." So he thought he was being interrogated. Within hours of the press being notified of this incident, the State Department announced that a visa for Einstein and his wife should be issued the next day. On December the 10th, 1932, he set sail for the US, arriving on January the 12th, 1933. Little more than 2 weeks later, Adolf Hitler took power in Germany and Einstein's stay in America became a permanent one. So Einstein was panicking that Adolf Hitler was taking power in Germany and he wanted to get away. And Hitler didn't like, people associated Hitler didn't really like Einstein, and they wanted to set up criminal proceedings against him to prosecute him. The quick official climb down was not the end of the surveillance and harassment, however, but only the beginning. The Woman Patriot Corporation's attack became the beginning of the Einstein file. In the 1930s, the FBI added to it from time to time, mostly with clippings and reports noting such matters as Einstein's support for the loyalist Spanish government in the Civil War against the Franco-fascists. During this period, Einstein tried with limited success to gain entry into the US for fellow refugees from the Nazi regime. Right. The next major component of the dossier deals with the launching of what became the Manhattan Project, the race to develop a nuclear weapon before the Nazis. Einstein, although a lifelong pacifist, wrote to then President Roosevelt suggesting work on such a weapon before the Hitler regime obtained one. When Einstein's name was suggested to assist in this work, Army intelligence asked the FBI for its opinion. The FBI file on Einstein was not yet very substantial, but J. Edgar Hoover supplied a cover letter and a biographical sketch complete with lies and half-truths. Well, if it's going by what information people are telling him, it's probably gossip, including statements that Einstein has been sponsoring the principal communist causes in the United States, and that in Berlin, even in the political free and easy period of 1923 to 1929, the Einstein home was known as Communist Centre and Clearing House. And that's what Hitler didn't really like about Einstein, is Einstein's connection with communism. So Einstein fled Hitler and he went to the US, and the US didn't like Einstein so much, but the authorities didn't like Einstein because of his communist connections. The FBI concluded, in view of his radical background, this office would not recommend the employment of Dr. Einstein on matters of secret nature without a very careful investigation, as it seems unlikely that a man of his background could, in such a short time, become a loyal American citizen. So they didn't trust him. After the Second World War, and with the onset of the Cold War, the surveillance of Einstein intensified. The FBI noted Einstein's fervent opposition to the dropping of the atom bomb on Hiroshima and Nagasaki in May 1946. Einstein agreed to lead the newly formed Emergency Committee of Atomic Scientists, which campaigned against nuclear weapons development. According to the FBI dossier, leader and chief spokesman for the CSA was Professor Albert Einstein, who in the past had been used by various communist front organisations as a big name, innocent sponsor. So even if he's not directly communist himself, the communists are using him. The campaign against Einstein reached its climax between 1950 and 1954. Jerome reports that Hoover's effort to defame and undermine the popularity of the scientist was apparently triggered by a guest appearance by Einstein on the premiere of a weekly television show hosted by Eleanor Roosevelt. The date was February 12, 1950. 2 weeks earlier, President Harry Truman had announced a crash program to build a hydrogen bomb. Einstein declared his opposition on national television. The Washington Post reported in its headline the next morning, Einstein fears hydrogen bomb might annihilate any life. So deep into politics. The very same day, Hoover ordered his chief of domestic intelligence to prepare a full report on Einstein, a report that was hastily drawn up and delivered 2 days later. So then it's the political witch hunt and hysteria over Soviet spies were about to move into high gear. Only a week earlier, Joseph McCartney, in one of his most famous speeches, had told an audience in Wheeling, West Virginia, "I'm here in my hand a list of 205 that were known to the Secretary of State as being members of the Communist Party, and who nevertheless are still working and shaping the policy of the State Department." That same week, Klaus Fuchs was arrested in London and confessed to spying for the USSR, that's Russia. The ensuing months saw the arrest of others, most prominently the Rosenbergs. As far as the FBI was concerned, Einstein's opposition to Washington's campaign against the Soviet Union was an open expression of disloyalty, so Einstein is considered disloyal to America. Tantamount to giving aid and comfort to the enemy, so he's considered disloyal and given comfort and aid to the enemy, which is the Soviets. Some evidence had to be found linking him to espionage. And no lead was too bizarre to ignore in the 4-year vendetta that followed. The FBI interviewed individuals soon found to be former mental patients who made bizarre claims, and it's sort of we can miss out this bit about the bizarre claims, talk about a robot and things. While the FBI proceeded with its probe, the Immigration and Naturalization Services, INS, were carrying out a parallel investigation aimed at taking away Einstein's status as a naturalised US citizen and deporting him. An INS memo to J. Edgar Hoover on March 8, 1950, only weeks after Hoover had launched his own effort, asked the FBI to furnish any derogatory information contained in any file on Einstein. In a follow-up, the INS stated this naturalised person, notwithstanding his worldwide reputation as a scientist, may properly be investigated for possible revocation of naturalisation. A 5-year investigation of Einstein followed. Right, and so they're thinking of getting rid of him. Einstein was not simply the passive victim of the defamation campaign, even though it was conducted in utmost secrecy, precisely because the authorities feared the backlash if it became publicly known. Einstein was well aware that he was under constant surveillance, and so that's the situation that he was in. And he was getting involved in politics, and
my love has no beginning, my
unfortunately
love
the
has no
advert thing's going off again.
You don't have to sit an exam.
my love won't bend.
You've no experience, but the job's still yours. You learn as you go, doing whatever it takes. At SMA, I will follow on
So we
the
get
lead
down
supported by
to
90.
this one, the popular image of Einstein, cultivated by the media and by and large accepted by his biographers, is that of a brilliant but somewhat absent-minded scientist, a man at home in the realm of theoretical physicists, but not in the everyday world. He has been turned into an icon and placed on a pedestal that allows his political views to be safely hidden away. When Time magazine chose him as Person of the Century several years ago, it omitted all mention of his socialist views. So what we got, the popular image is false. Einstein was steeped in German and European culture. Born in 1879, he grew up in the country that was the home of the mass socialist workers' movement founded by Marx and Engels, and although he did not fully embrace Marxism, he was deeply influenced by it. From his teenage years, Einstein manifested the internationalism and humanism that would characterize his entire life. So he's not what the publicity campaign wants to be. If we can carry on down, if there's anything else worth picking up. So I think it's pretty much it. The image of Einstein, which has been presented in the newspapers, in the news media, is not what Einstein really is. He was really deep into politics, and the FBI didn't like him because they thought he was a communist spy, or thought we had communist connections. Deemed to be an enemy of America. So we have reasons why people liked him. The reasons are he stood up for human rights, and unfortunately those reasons are also the reasons why other people didn't like him. So that's what we got, a political figure who has messed up physics. It is, I think, corruption of physics by politics. He looks like a person that is more concerned with getting involved into politics, and so this is what we got in my other little talk here. Einstein dragged physics into a mess by his political beliefs, so that's another connection to it. He was thought to be a communist because of his political beliefs. That's why you got people liking him, and you also got other people don't liking him because of his communist connections. So was Einstein a Pinko communist spy? Well, he was quite close to it, even if he might not have been. Thank you.